Welcome to the Women's Connection. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen, your moderator. The Women's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned?
Welcome. It's a topic most people don't talk about. In fact, they're ashamed. But yet, it's just because nobody talks about it that it is more widespread than one can believe. What I'm talking about is domestic abuse. And with me is somebody who has survived and has a story to tell about what happened to her living abroad. And I would like to welcome Paula Lucas. Paula, welcome.
Thank you very much, Barry.
You have an unusual story in the fact that most of your situation happened when you were living abroad. Can you just give us a recap of what happened?
Well, I had just graduated from university and I'd moved to San Francisco, and I met a man there who I thought I had found Prince Charming. He was seemed too good to be true. He was Middle Eastern, very good looking, had traveled around the world, spoke 3 languages. He was a photojournalist for Newsweek magazine. And we had pretty much a whirlwind romance in San Francisco, and we ended up getting married and then going over to Europe and living there for 2 years. And then we moved to the Middle East I guess that would have been 1997. And I think in retrospect, looking back, there were signs that he was abusive. He was, wanted to spend all of his time with me, always giving me presents, and I'd been isolated from family and friends without really realizing that, slowly but surely. And then when we got to the Middle East, the abuse increased quite a bit. At first it was more emotional and psychological, but then it became physical, and as each of my sons were born, the abuse escalated. When my first son was born, he was only a few months old, and my ex-husband picked him up and threw him against the crib, and that was the first time he'd become violent I'd seen him violent with a child. So it was really a scary thing, but we were living with his mother and his sister, and I would go to them for help, and they would, sort of give me a mixed message where, oh, he really loves you, you poor thing, but he really loves you. So they were accepting that violence, and he was also quite abusive with his mother and his sister as well.
Would you find that this behavior is more prevalent because of the culture over there, and that they sweep it under the carpet and they just go from generation to generation? Or was this the exception to the rule?
I think that he was an exception. Even there in the Middle East, it's not really acceptable it's shameful. I mean, if people hear that you're beating your wife, it's something that, they would say, well, you can't do that. And I think with my ex-husband, it wasn't the norm, because there's a lot of American women married to Middle Eastern men, and their relationships are fine, and I've remarried to a Middle Eastern man, and he's a wonderful person. I think what happens, though, that if the person is abusive, being in that environment certainly empowers them more because of the way the society is structured, where the male has many more rights than the woman. Where I couldn't get my driver's license without my ex-husband's permission. They can approve your form of birth control. You can't get a bank account. You can't leave without their permission. So it certainly empowers an abusive character in that environment, but I don't think that environment necessarily, makes people abusive.
Moving forward, you tried to talk to his mother. She said she was ignoring you, basically. How did you finally decide to leave, or what steps did you take to leave and said, enough's enough?
Well, he got his American passport at the end of 1995, and looking back, I think that was one of the main reasons he had married me, to be able to have that, because he was Palestinian and he traveled on a Lebanese travel document issued to Palestinian refugees, and you couldn't travel very many places around the world, but with an American passport, that really empowered him. So starting in 1996, the abuse really escalated. It became extremely violent, almost like he would plan things out, and started fearing for my life and for the lives of the children. There's many incidences where he would threaten to kill us or threaten to kill the kids. In 1997, he was driving the car, and he was driving about 100 miles an hour, and he lost control of the car, and we hit a concrete barrier head on. And at that point, I knew that either accidentally or on purpose, he was probably going to kill me. So I went to the embassy. I started asking for help. They couldn't help me. I just kept trying anybody that would help. My family went to the State Department. They couldn't help me. We were under Islamic law. I couldn't leave without his permission. I didn't have access to the children's American passports because he'd had them hidden. And I just felt really, really trapped. It was like wanting to get out so badly, but not physically being able to get out of the country. And then in 1999, he was traveling in Europe, and he was robbed. And they took his passport and all of his money. So I knew there would be a window of opportunity there to try to get out, because usually when he traveled, I never knew when he was coming back. He may travel and come back in a day, or he might travel and come back in a month. I finally went to the embassy, begged them to get me out. They said they couldn't. They would create an international incident. They really wanted to help on a personal level, but they have to look at the bigger picture, and they couldn't help me get out. So I was able to finally find the children's American passports. He had them hidden. They were very well hidden. But I did find them and went to the bank. I forged his signature on a check and took out money to get tickets back to the United States, and then I forged documents giving me permission to leave the country. And then left, and it took like a midnight flight out to New York, and then from New York took the train across country to where my sister lived in Oregon.
Oh my gosh, I've got goosebumps. Awesome. I really want to find out more about what happened to your husband, but let's move on. Since this episode, you have now formed an organization about helping women in the Middle East with abuse, and how did that all come about?
Women being abused all over the world. When I was over there, I had no one to talk to. I just wanted someone I could pick up the phone and talk to and say, this is the situation I'm in, what can I do? And there wasn't anybody. And there was a lot of things that I should have brought with me. I had pictures of the kids that had bruises on their bodies. I didn't bring those. I didn't think to bring those. And you'd think that that was something that would be obvious to me. But when you're operating in crisis mode, you're on autopilot, and you're not really thinking about the things that you need to collect in order to have evidence when you come back to the United States. So I came back here thinking that everything was fine. I'm back home. I can just file for divorce. But then I found out that he could file jurisdictional issues on me, and he tried to force me back to the Middle East. So I decided that, this is unbelievable. I don't think people are aware of this. So I started, at first it was just online. It was a website for American women and children being abused in foreign countries. And I started it while I was living in a shelter. We were homeless for about 9 months when I first came back, living in shelters. And started that and got it online in December of 1999. And then in April of 2001, I started an international crisis line, so women from 175 countries around the world can call in toll-free and speak at the time to speak to me about their situation, and I can kind of guide them, find out exactly what's going on, and see how we can help them get back to the United States. And that was 6 years ago. We started the international crisis line.
How do you get your funding to do all this?
Well, we don't receive any government funding at all. Our first 3 funders were in 2003, and that was 3 women, Doris Buffett, who's a sister of Warren Buffett, Yoko Ono, and Jet Parker out of Switzerland gave us our seed money in 2003. And we received grants and fundraising, and now we also have a project called Salon Girls. And if you go to salongirlswithaz.com, we're asking women or men from all over the United States to submit funny stories that they've heard in their hair salon or in their beauty parlor. And we'll pick the funniest stories and produce a book, and then sell the book, and the proceeds would come back into the organization. And we've had to get creative with our funding because we don't get any government funding, and we really need to start establishing more funding streams because the demand for the services is growing.
What do you attribute the demand for the services to be growing? Is it because you're now known, or is it the fact that abuse is on the increase?
I don't think abuse is on the increase. I think that we're becoming better known. In 2005 and 2006, we did a lot of outreach through the American embassies overseas and American women's clubs overseas. The State Department is now referring a lot of victims to us where they didn't refer victims to us before. We established a better relationship with them, established some trust with them, and they like what we're doing. So I think it's more of an outreach, and people are more aware of this. We were looking the other day, and more than 100 organizations are linked to our website around the world. So we're happy that we're finally getting the word out. And so it is outreach. It is more women are hearing about us. We looked at our statistics for the first quarter of 2007, and then we compared it to our statistics for the first quarter of 2006, and our call volume is up 48%.
Wow, that is a lot. It says good things, but it also says bad things about society. What do you think is the next step? I mean, if somebody's in an abusive situation, it can be verbal. It doesn't have to always be physical. What would you say are some of the characteristics of a woman who is being abused?
Well, usually, a lot of times women aren't sure that they're being abused. They know they're not comfortable. They're in that situation. He's yelling at her. He's calling her names. And there's a lot of victim blaming, so he may hit her and say, oh, well, if only you had cooked dinner on time, I wouldn't have had to have hit you. So she starts taking a lot of the abuser's behavior onto herself and sort of feeling guilty and feeling like everything is her fault. And like you said, even if it's not physical abuse, it can be, verbal or emotional. Nobody could ever love you but me. Oh, you look terrible. You just, sort of really tearing down her self-esteem. And part of that is so she doesn't leave him. So if she feels so bad about herself, she's not going to try to leave. So we see that a lot. It could be sort of, if you ever leave me, I'm going to take the children away from you. So using the children as a tool where she would never think of leaving because, he would take the children from me. So a lot of, emotional and psychological control. It could be controlling her, like where she goes. When she goes to the store, he could be timing her. You have, half an hour to get to the store, and if you don't get back within half an hour, you're going to be in trouble. So sort of threatening, just sort of her basic day-to-day things. If she goes to it, if she works and she has a job, and she comes home and she's happy and she's in a good mood, it could be, oh, why are you so happy? Are you having an affair? Sort of accusing her of having other relationships. And then, of course, it can progress to, the physical abuse, pushing, slapping, hitting. And then there's, like with my ex, it was that constant death threat. I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill myself, and then kill kill all of us, we're all going to die together. I'm sort of driving too fast in the car and, threatening, to crash the car so we'll all die. It runs the gamut. There are so many different ways that someone can be abusive to another person.
Would you say that a woman starts out having low self-esteem to begin with, and then this just keeps perpetuating the situation? Or she meets her Prince Charming, and slowly but surely, it's almost like a drip method of breaking down the person's self-esteem.
I think you're right, Barry. I think it's more of a drip method, that you get women who are, professionals, like they could be lawyers, they could be, very professional women who have high self-esteem, and then they meet this man, and it's very, very slowly they erode the self-esteem. When you first meet the person, they're wonderful. I mean, they give you all their attention, they tell you how wonderful you are, and it's usually, a very, very nice beginning to a relationship. But there are some signs, especially if the abuser wants to get involved very quickly in the relationship and sort of becomes controlling. But I think the analogy I've heard is if you put a frog in a pot of boiling water, the frog will jump out immediately because it's not comfortable. But if you put a frog in a pot of water that's cold and you turn the heat on very, very slowly, and the heat comes up so slowly the frog doesn't notice it, the frog will end up boiling to death because he doesn't see that the heat is coming. And that's the analogy of domestic violence that I think is quite accurate. You don't see it coming. It's just very insidious, and it happens very slowly.
What can society do? I guess that's the main question.
I think just take notice. I think, if you have friends around you that are noticing this and they come to you and you're being abused, the first thing you're going to do is deny it, because you're sort of trying to protect your family, you're trying to protect your children. But if friends notice, and even if you deny it, they should still document that. They can write down on a calendar, this day I noticed, Mary had bruises. This day I noticed, Mary had, a black eye or something like that. And that evidence can come into court later on, as proof, even if the victim herself doesn't really have that proof. Anything that's documented on paper, and it doesn't have to be like typed or anything, it can just be handwritten notes on a calendar, or on a napkin, or on anything that's available, can help in court later on. Taking, if the victim realizes that she's in a bad situation, taking photographs. I had photographs of the kids, and they had bruises on their necks and things. Or tape recording the abuser. If the abuser goes into a rage, I tried at one point in time, I had an audio tape where I was waiting for him to go into a rage, and I actually did record him going into a rage. And then my oldest son was about 5 years old at the time, and he walked by and he said, "Mama, what's that red light on in your handbag?" So my abuser found out I was taping him and got even more angry. So it has to be done. I think everybody knows what their safety levels are, so I would never say a woman should try something that she feels if the abuser finds out it's going to put her in more danger. But certainly do whatever is within your power. And if you do get photographs or you do have some kind of evidence, give them to a friend. What we have, the women we work with overseas, is have them send us the evidence here in the United States. So when she does return to the United States, we have it, it's in a safe place, and we can use that evidence in court. Otherwise, what you end up with is a he said, she said scenario. So it's always important to try to gather as much evidence as possible, but that is a difficult thing to do. We can't always expect that that's going to be a possible thing. Also, doctor's records, police reports, anything like that.
Are the embassies abroad becoming more sympathetic in trying to help you without causing an international incident?
I think individual people at the embassies are becoming more aware, but it's very difficult. There is a policy now in place that the American embassies can't issue American passports for minor American children without the approval of both parents. So that's very difficult in a domestic violence situation, because the victim needs the abuser's permission to get new passports, which isn't going to happen. There's also the Hague Convention on International Child Abduction. So if a woman flees from one country and comes back to the United States, the abuser can file international kidnapping charges against her and force her to return the children to that foreign country. And if they're not from a Hague Convention country, there's still other international treaties in place for jurisdiction. So it's very difficult. The embassies are in a very difficult position where they'd like to help the women, but at the same time they can only have very limited assistance in these cases, where we don't really have the same restrictions as the embassy. We have a lot more wiggle room where we can help the victim get back to the United States, and then help her with her legal fees or housing, and also help with relocation back to the United States. We can do a lot more for her, and I say her, although we do have male victims as well, than the American embassies can do.
What I don't understand is what makes it so difficult for a woman who's married to a foreigner have difficulty bringing her children back to the United States if she's an American citizen.
And I was really surprised by this too. When I returned, I thought, I'm home, that's it. I don't have to worry about anything. I can get divorced and custody and live back in the United States. So when my ex filed for jurisdiction and custody, and I had to hire an international custody lawyer, I was, in shock, really. I thought that this was my refuge, this was my home. But jurisdiction for divorce and child custody is not based where you are a citizen, it's based where you are residing. So because I was over in the United Arab Emirates for 12 years, the United Arab Emirates technically had jurisdiction over child custody and divorce, even though I came back to the United States and I was an American citizen. So what I had to prove in court, or what my lawyers had to prove in court, and what his lawyers tried to prove, was that he was saying that if I return to the Middle East, women have more rights in the Middle East than they have here. And what my lawyers were saying that no, for me to go back to the Middle East would be a violation of my my human rights, not my international human rights, but it would be a violation of my human rights to return to the Middle East. But I had to go all the way to Oregon Supreme Court to uphold that ruling that the Oregon Circuit Court made, and my legal fees since I came back to the United States have been $60,000 to be able to keep my American children in the U.S. and then all the subsequent things that happened after that in those laws. So it is very difficult, and even though I didn't come from a Hague Convention country, within the Hague Convention countries it's international kidnapping if you take a child across borders and flee transnationally back to the United States. And the reason is because they made this convention thinking that most of the time abductors are the non-custodial father, and they're taking these children from the mother and they're fleeing transnationally to foreign countries, and these mothers have no legal recourse to get their children back. So that was the reason why they had made this convention. The problem is there's no allowance for domestic violence. So when American women flee foreign countries and come back to the United States for safety, they're in violation of the Hague Convention, even though they are fleeing for their lives and for the safety of their children. So we are seeing 2 or 3 cases in the last couple of years where judges have said, no, domestic violence was a reason enough to flee and you can stay in the United States. But the majority of women who flee Hague Convention countries are sent back to those foreign countries and the abuser gets custody.
So what happens to these poor women who have to be sent back? Do they survive? Do they finally get out, or what?
They get sent back and the abuser gets custody. Typically they don't even have rights to see their children unless maybe it's supervised. They have to fight in the courts over there to try to get access to their children again. They don't end well. Sometimes we have one case now where she was sent back. She's gained custody of her oldest child, but there's 2 other children she hasn't gained custody of, and the abuse continues. The children continue to be abused by the abuser. We have another case where the woman was sent back about 1.5 years ago, and she still has not seen her children. So they're very, very difficult cases. So what we try to do when the women call is give them their options. So they'll call in and say, I'm an American woman, I'm in France, and I'm married to a man from Italy, and my children are dual nationality, and I've been here for 4 years. So we have to do a case study where we look at her case, we look at the laws of those countries, the reason that she went over to the foreign country, because intent is important. Looking at this, if the intention was only to go for 3 months for a holiday and then come back, but he's been able to keep her there against her will, that's very different than them moving over there and living for 3 years and showing that they were permanently planning to live over there. So we look at the cases, we consult with lawyers, and then we give her her options. We let her know, well, if she stays in that country, then she can do, A, B, and C. If she flees and comes back to the United States, she can do X, Y, and Z, and these are the potential outcomes. And then we try to do an empowerment-based crisis line. So ultimately, the decision is hers. If she decides to stay, then we find resources for her in that country that she's in. If she decides to come back, we help her come back to the United States and find resources for her in the United States. These cases are very complicated. On one case, we can spend, up to 10, 15, 20 hours on research. We brought back a family from the Middle East this summer we'd been working with for 3 years. So it really, we can work with someone from a very short period of time to several years before they're able to get out.
Paula, I'm overwhelmed. This is just such an enormous situation, and you have done such an incredible job of helping all these other women. What would you like to say in the closing moments of the show?
Well, I think that a lot of people in the United States feel that all an American woman has to do is get to an embassy and she'll be able to get back home. And we've all seen that movie, Not Without My Daughter. And it's so much more complicated than that. It's very, very difficult, and it's not that easy. I think that's one of the main messages, that we think that as an American citizen, our freedoms travel with us, and they don't. When you go to a foreign country, you're under the laws of that country, and even if you're being abused and abuses against the law. It's domestic violence, and domestic violence is very, very hidden. It's not as if you're in a foreign country and you get raped by a stranger, or you get your handbag stolen, or there's some kind of crime where there's some legal recourse in that country. Most of the time the legal recourse is very limited, or the woman's too afraid to seek legal recourse in that country because she doesn't speak the language. She doesn't know how to navigate that system. So I think that these women are in really, really bad situations, and just to recognize how difficult it really is to get back home. And I know we've heard a lot of people say, well, she shouldn't have gone over there in the first place. But when you're in love and you think this person's so wonderful, and you're going to a foreign country and it's an adventure and it's very exciting. And for a lot of people it is. They go live overseas and they have a fabulous experience, and it's the experience of their life, and they don't regret anything. But for other people, it can be an absolute nightmare, and getting home can be very, very difficult.
What's the 800 number that you have that people can call?
It's 866 U.S. Women, 866-879-6636. It's internationally toll-free from 175 different countries, so the victim just contacts the local AT&T operator and they're connected to us toll-free. We pay those toll charges. They're anywhere from 1 minute to $4 a minute. In the United States, we deal a lot with the families who usually have daughters overseas, and then they just dial the number straight, 1-866 U.S. Women, and we work with them as well. We are operating currently nonstop from 6 a.m. Monday mornings through 6 a.m. Saturday mornings. We're not operating on Saturdays and Sundays right now until we can increase our funding. But yeah, we have advocates available all the time. It's a volunteer team. We have 16 volunteer advocates on the crisis line, which is great. We're really happy to have that, that resource. And then we also have a gal, Whitney Ziegler, who's our crisis services coordinator, who helps do all the, the relocation, the logistics, finding lawyers for these women. We have a transitional housing program in the Portland metro area, and we just hired a part-time person, also Jennifer Frederick, to help with the crisis line during the day, since the call volume has increased so much.
Paula, I want to thank you so much. I can't tell you what a revelation this is, and I do hope that our audience uses it but doesn't need to use it.
Thank you very much, Barrie, for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's been great. And thank you for joining us. Bye now.